look like you had something you wanted to say. No? Okay. I'm here, not in Windsor, but in COVID isolation, day 6. So I'm feeling fine. It's just I'd like to get out. So I'd like to test negative sometime soon. So if anyone can send me negative test vibes to ask Hashem, please. Thank you. Also, it's half the family too. The boys got it, not the girls. So go figure. Anyway, today we're going to do, I think, what I would best describe as things that are almost batel b'shishim. Not quite one way or the other. I think it's maybe a good title. We'll see if that works. I'm going to use that as my working premise for today. And I'm going to start us in Chulin, in Gid HaNasheh, Perek Gid HaNasheh, Daf Tzadi Vav Amud Bet. Probably about halfway down the Amud, Amar Rabbi Abahu, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Isrin Shebatara Misharin Ki'ilu Hen Batzel Vekaflot. So maybe I'll have somebody else, even though I just read a whole bunch of that. Maybe I'll do the opening. I'll open, and then we'll keep going. Everybody with me though, where we are in Chulin, Sadi Zayin Amud Bet, halfway down the Amud. Great. Okay. And I know I shared pictures of one of my stuff with you, so you can see it in like a printed version. So I'll start again. Amar Rabbi Abahu, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Isrin Shebatara Mesharinan Ki'ilu Hen Batzel Vekaflot. Right, that all the Isrin in the Torah, we measure them as if they're an onion or is that a leek? I can't remember, whatever, something like that. Leek, that sounds good. But it comes from a Greek word, which is not quite kaflot, but something like that. And if you look, actually, I'll just jump us down to the Rashi, because I think it's important. Rashi says, Mesharinan otam ki'ilu ha'isur batzel o kaflot, v'ilu hayanoten tam beheter zeh, Shnit Bashelimo Osro, right? So we anything we drop in, like in Isra that we drop into Heter, right? We view it as if it's like an onion or a leek, right? And if an onion or a leek in that amount would have given flavor to the Heter, right? When it's cooked with it, then it's Oser, the thing, right? And then Rashi goes on to say, Uvahach Isure Delo Matzi Limit Aminhu Kamar, right? Then we're talking about forbidden things that you are not able to be tasted. Could go on minu mino, like min bimino, or ve'inami, alternatively, she'eno mino, the isura veleka kfela, right? It's eno mino and it's asur, but there's no kfela. Ve'akati lo ifsik hilchata b'shishim. He says at this point in time, we still haven't come up with 60 as the measurement for that. In other words, right, we're getting ourselves to 60 here. This is the kind of, you can imagine the Amoraim figuring out, well, what exactly is that level if we don't have anybody else ideally to taste it for us to figure out when it's asur or not. Okay, and this is the standard that Rabbi Abahu comes up, or actually really Rabbi Yochanan comes up with. So really Rabbi Yochanan, early Amoraim. So Rav Landis. Oh, Rav Landis, you're on mute.
The connection between shishim and tasting, what's that connection?
The connection seems to be, assuming that this is what becomes the standard for shishim, is that 60 becomes a thing that an onion or a leek, if dropped into a forbidden onion or leek dropped into heter, would no longer be able to be tasted in 60.
So the real standard is what?
The real standard is tam. At the end of the day, tam is the real thing. So yeah.
Shishim is, what term would you use before Alexi kills me? Would you use a chazaka? Would you use a chazaka or a presumption? No, I mean, what term you use? Shishim is what?
Good. I think
Shishim is what to tam.
Yeah, I think it is a presumption to stand in for tam. That we can, as a good presumption. In other words, we can, and we'll get to this, like what about in a second, for things that are stronger tasting. But it's a thing where if I dropped an Isser into something, I can say, I don't think I'm going to be able to taste it. And I can do that with enough confidence to be able to sit down and eat it then if I don't have another alternative. So
I think Lexi should say something.
go for it, Lexi.
I think that the Batzel v'Kaflut, I wouldn't necessarily say that the Shishim comes from that or even maps neatly onto that. Like, I actually think the Batzel v'Kaflut and also what we saw earlier with the turnip and the meat, I think we can see as like earlier paradigms of how do we try and guesstimate what flavor looks like when we can't taste it. And Shishim seems to be a slightly later thing that we arrive at when we're like, actually saying like an onion or a leek is still not quite as standardized, and like having a shear, a number is kind of an easier thing to operate by. But I wouldn't necessarily say that it actually is what the Batzel v'Kaflut looks like.
Great. I mean, that plays actually well with the Rashi V'akate lo ifsik hilchat habeshishim, right? That it's not there yet. We're getting there, but we're not there yet. So
I agree, but all standardization is always tell you it's the real thing.
I'll bring a phone.
It's just the nature of standardization. Okay, I'm out.
great.
I have
Okay.
a question. I have a question. Why
Yeah.
are we doing this mental comparison? Why don't we just say, imagine it's what it is in what it is? Why are we imagining it's something else in something else? Something else in this. Just imagine it is what it is.
Maybe because we don't have experience tasting Isurin. And yeah, and it's like it is one step of standardization. Like maybe we would like it's one step away from saying like however flavorful something is, it's saying no, onions and leeks are very flavorful, so we'll standardize that like everything should be at like at least that level.
So in other
of
words,
the-
it's what you're saying is it's like it's if onions and leek wouldn't flavor this broth, then for sure this isser won't flavor my broth.
right.
It's like it's sort of taking a error on the side of being more strict.
We'll see, of course, right, that it's for most things, right? There's going to be exceptions, of course, which we'll see in a second. So good. In fact, so I'll push on for a minute and then I'll give up reading. But so Amarle Rabbi Abba le'Abaye, right? So what does he respond? Well, Sharinu bepilpalim v'tavlin, right? Defilu be'elif lo b'telim. Right. So, okay, well, what about spices, right? Peppers and those things. I mean, we know this. If anyone who has ever cooked, it's definitely not 1 in 60, right? It's a lot less than that. Even maybe salt, right? If you add just a little bit of it, you can flavor something pretty strongly with it. So why not use that as the standard? And those even 1 in 1,000. In other words, if we went, of course, to that standard, essentially nothing would ever be batel, right? So Amarle,
This feels like it's sort of.
Go ahead. Yeah, please go for it.
This feels like it's sort of reacting against what we were just saying about like trying to make a more conservative estimate of like what would be the most flavorful thing, and saying like, well, why don't we go even farther? And then like you'll say you never, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you're Matcha Yisurim, you want to be as machmir as possible. And I
Right.
think that's the question here, right? It's like, if you want to be Matcha Yisurim, so why are you taking such a low standard? Make it Pil Pilim, which is much harder to like kind of be battle.
Exactly. Make it so we never, and of course, I think well, we'll get an answer to this, but also, right, there is a sense here of at some point, if you just want to say nothing is batel, then nothing is batel, and you're done. But then it also is an unrealistic standard at some point. So,
Right. I think Yavni's read of like, again, this is kind of almost him like Abaye pushing back. I think like feels intuitive because I think the idea that Abaye would be actively suggesting this is hard to buy, given that we're saying there is such a thing as Bitul Isorim. Like, I can't imagine that he would be sincerely suggesting, actually, yeah, everything should be like salt and pepper and therefore never batel, right? Like that's fundamentally an absurd argument. And so I think he's like saying, yeah, I think he'd actually be pushing back, like, oh, you're going to give such a strict thing of like the really noxious like onions and leeks. Why not go all the way? Why not say it's even like peppers?
And so what's his opinion? What does he prefer you do?
Actually know how it'll taste.
Yeah, actually,
Yeah.
Ahmad, do the mental exercise as though it's whatever isser it is in whatever substance it fell. Do that mental exercise. Don't do another mental exercise.
But of course, he has got a response, right? And he says, Amarle, Shiaru chachamim de'eno tentam bisurim yoter mi batzel v'kaflot, right? The Chachamim made a measurement, an estimation that there's no isurin out there that give more tam than batzel and kaflot, right? Which is, a little bit of a troubling answer in some ways, right? That's the best you can, there's nothing out there.
We don't imagine actual pilpel being asur.
Asur, exactly, yeah. Or it really is, in a sense of like kind of what Lexi is saying is that Rebbe Abba's response to Abaye is, well, I'm going to go reduct you ad absurdum on you if you're going to start going on this path. And the pilpolim is an absurd argument, right? Unless you actually drop pepper in there, you can't assume that the average Isur you dropped in is pepper. So
I think he's essentially saying that, like, other than literal spices and like things that we see the language again of like coming, like things that are literally designed to give flavor. Other than that, like onions are probably some of the most like sharp, noticeable tasting things. Like it seems like a fair assumption.
And it goes also back to the question: what is the difference here? Actually, we're talking about chashivas. We're talking about like in a normal sense, what is something that I can even count it? Because like we're talking like, how can I be sure that I'm actually not tasting Yisr? What the Gemara basically saying, even though you are maybe tasting Yisr, we don't care because it's not chashuv enough. It doesn't actually exist. Like the terminology that the Gemara uses, it doesn't count anymore.
No, but then what happened with actual pilpilim, right? Like what would be the case then? If you have actual like non-kosher pilpilim that you could try, like what would be the at what point would it be batel? Like,
but there you have the chashivut of the pilpil.
Ruben is from Mexico, so he knows about pepper.
It's I think that's I have to imagine, and I think Rav Lexi's argument plays this out, is if you actually drop pepper in there, then yes, right? Then you actually have to either have someone measure it or assume that it's not batel. Someone taste it or assume it's not batel. But if you drop a piece of pork, you can assume the pork is no more flavorful than an onion, right? And that's really, I think, where we're trying to go with this.
Yeah, but you can't read that in the sentence. Like kol isurim shebat Torah. If you wanted, like, if he was saying the way you're reading it, they would have said kol isurim shebat Torah chutz mi whatever, like melach or pilpelim. But it seems to be saying that even in a case where pilpel drop into it, we still mesharinam b'shishim. It says kol isurim shebat Torah. That's how I read it in the sentence.
And I think this will go ahead, Rav Nachum, please.
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, but I think I agree with you that the kol is problematic. But I think what he means is kol, anything that is forbidden, in other words, as a substance, as opposed to a category. Like, for example, pepper is not a substance that's forbidden. Like pork is a substance that's forbidden. But it's a category in the sense that if it becomes usher because it's orla or something like that, he's not talking about those cases. When he says kol, his kol really, he's not thinking about. He's referring to all the things that it says in Vayikra, sherets and all these things that are forbidden. Those things. That's what he's talking about. So I think that's. I mean, that's what I think that you're forced to say that just out of being reasonable, a reasonable reading.
Yeah, I think logic at some point has to come into all of these things. But which is really, I think, going to come in later when we're going to see this, right? If your thing is less than 1 in 60, but you sit down, you eat it, and you taste it, and it tastes like the Isur, right? We'll get into the level, is that the Rabbanan and Doraita, question, but at some point, logic dictates you have to not eat it anymore, right? We saw
that in the Beit Yosef, yeah.
Yeah. So good. So let's push on a little bit in the Gemara. Raphael, can you read for us? Keep going. Amar Rav Nachman, Gid b'shishim.
Sure. Just a second. I lost. Amar Rav Nachman Gid b'shishim ve'en Gid bin aminyan. Kachal b'shishim ve'kachal min aminyan. Beitam b'shishim ve'en beitam min aminyan. There's this like basic list lezikaron. Even though like we have distinctions here, we have this like they're similar and different like in some ways. They're all basic standard is shishim, but we have the counting is the substance itself part of the shishim. So gid en mina shishim, kachal is mina shishim, and we'll see some complication with it in the tool and the Bet Yosef. And this comes along complicated with what we just saw in the Gemara, that Kol Yisrael Shabbat Tilim Ken B'Shishim.
Good. Yeah, so they're not, which was a statement we had at another point, right? That that they measure b'shishim, right? B'kfela b'shishim, right? And here it's they're all shishim. It's just a question of, is the substance itself part of that shishim, or is it not part of that shishim, right? So, and good. I just because we're going to get read the Rashi for us, ve'in gi midam inyan, and then also Beit Sa.
Yeah, just a second.
It's the first wide lines in Rashi.
Yes. ואין גיל דאמינם דבאינן שישים דהיתר לבד מיני, אבל כך על אויל ומין היתר הוא, אם נתבשל עם הבשר, משארין על בשישים לבהד דידי. Meaning, the kachal is not a ister. It has chalav in it, that this chalav can become when mixed with meat.
Exactly. Mixed with other meat becomes asur. Yeah. So
yeah, or the meat of the kachal itself, usually in this type of situation. So it is part of the shishim. Like it need to be big, because like you actually need to have it be part of the shishim without the milk possibly inside, but that's another question. But in gid you actually have a min isur. If a beitza, you said the other the next.
Yeah, next one, beitza.
Beitza shel of tameh.
Good. So what kind of beitza are we talking about here?
That's not a beitza sheyesh befroach.
Yeah, here's dafka, right? The beitza of an eagle. I don't know, right? Something like that. So according to Rashi,
even though we see the same din about beitza shel befroach in the next phase in the Gemara, maybe Rashi simply doesn't feel right like to put this back here in this.
I think Rashi is actually just talking about what our hava amina is at this point in the Gemara.
Yeah,
well, I think Rashi's going to have to deal with the fact that it's not going to be in Shishim in a second here in the Gemara potentially. But the Rambam's going to read a little bit differently, right? But so yeah. So I think that's why Rashi's anticipating the next sugya we're going to do here. So there has to be two different types of eggs, right? So this here, it's an egg of an of tahor, and the next one will be a different kind of egg potentially. So it's a reading, because we're going to see that the Gemara seems to be split here. Okay, good. Any other thoughts or questions so far? But we're not. I don't want to get too much into the details of kechal at the moment, because I'm going to mess them up at the moment. But in general, it's the meat. Yeah, the kechal by itself with the milk itself, deoraita, is fine as long as it's not cooked with anything else. I think I have that right. But once you mix it with other things, it becomes problematic. So in other words, the milk in the kechal with the meat of that kechal are permitted with each other, deoraita, not necessarily derabanan. Okay, so good. Let's keep going. Let's Yavni, you want to pick up reading Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Breder of Mesharshia.
אמר רבי יצחק בריידר רב משרשיה, וכחל עצמו אסור, ואם נפל לקדרה אחרת אוסר. So if the kachal itself that has been cooked, and its flavor has been battled among other meat or other kachalim or something, then it or whatever else, then it itself is asur, meaning you have to take it out and get rid of it. And if you take it out and then it falls into another kdera, it has the potential of like making that other pot asur.
Beautiful. Keep going.
Amar Rav Ashi, ki havinan be Rav Kahana ibailan ki mesharinan bedide mesharinan or bebaide nafak mine mesharinan. So Rav Ashi says he was at the house of Rav Kahana, and he asked him if when we measure that, do we measure it including the do we measure it against do we measure the shishim against the whole kachal or against what came out of the kachal? Pshita debedide mesharinan. Of course, we measure against the whole kachal. Because if we would say that you measure against what came out of the kachal, how would you know?
Great. This is all a Straw question, as you can see, keep going.
אלא, wait, sorry, say that again?
It's kind of a straw question, right? I think it's obvious to him that you measure against the whole thing because he's going to ask the follow-up here. So I think really he wants to get.
Right.
So
Right. Although, anyway, we do see opinions that's like we sometimes do try to estimate what
yes, great. So
אלא מעתה נפל לקדירה אחרת, לא יאסר. But in that case, if we're assuming that the whole quantity came out, if it falls into another pot, why should it assur that other pot?
great. I want to just read quickly here the Rashi Ela Ma'ata, and the reason I'll read it is because there's some probably Girsa issues going on with the Rashi here. Right, Ela Ma'ata, Rashi says, Ho'il v'didei misharinan, ha ivtil kule shalach kol. It should be probably ta'amo b'tavshil, right? That the whole thing is if the kachal is batel because all of its flavor is now left and gone into the tavshil. Dilav hachi amabayit shishim kineg. It probably should be kineged kulo instead of kamot kulo, right? So why would you need 60 against it, the whole thing, if it didn't lose? If we don't assume it lost all its flavor, v'kevan dekule batalte nafal b'ktera acheret al yasar. Right. So if it's all been batel, if it falls into something and there's 60 against it to batel, the entire flavor that came out of it falls into another, that same kachal falls into another pot. It's lost its flavor. What's the, how can it be osera that next pot? Right. It's a pretty good challenge, right? If you're going to assume it's, well, I don't know, pretty good. It's a good challenge that if you assume that it lost all of its flavor in the first kedera, how can it be osera second kedera? So
but we didn't say we assumed that it lost all its flavor. We just said that we couldn't know how much flavor it lost.
That's why I took away the word pretty from my good, qualifying my good challenge there. Exactly why. So.
What flavor are we worried about coming out of the kachal?
We are worried about the flavor of the milk that has gotten meat flavor from the rest of the pot, exactly. Right? Maybe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, Rashi says
but no, on the first time, what are we worried about?
Still the flavor of the milk that has been with the meat of the rest of the pot. Right. So if it hasn't come out, then maybe it hasn't been with the meat of the rest of the pot. Maybe the flavor of the meat comes in also. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we could play that game for a while of to, what point does it actually osir? But we're worried about the milk being with the milk meat combo that has happened. So.
And it's in a pot of meat. Yeah.
Yeah. Of basar. So.
Right.
But good. So finish it up. So what's the answer, Yavni?
כיוון דאמר רב יצחק ברי דרב משרשי וכחל עצמו אסור, שביו הרבנן כחתיכה דנבלה. So because it's sort of funny that it's saying like because of this decision, because we say that the kachal itself becomes like a nevela when the meat flavor gets mixed in with the milk that is there, then we just consider it as if it is a piece of like meat that hasn't, meat that hasn't been shechted properly.
Great. In fact, read the Rashi there, Kevan Demar Rav Yitzchak.
מפני שבתחילה נאסר עד שלא נצטמק מפני שבתחילה נאסר עד שלא נצטמק מי שנתנה הקדרה בו טעם מיד נאסר, ומאז שביו רבנן כחתיכת איסור שהיא לעולם אסורה כדאמר במתניתין בזמן שמכירו.
Explain.
So because at the beginning of this process, the kachal itself became asur from the other meat flavor coming into the milk, which happened before, like we do say that all of the milk, all of the problematic flavor came out, and that's why we need to measure against the whole thing. But before it all came out, it already became asur, and therefore that kachal became just a piece of isur that never goes back to being anything other than isur.
Great. And so from there we get the sense that whenever an isur goes into something, right, we always have to get rid of the isur, which is, as he puts out, as a stam mishnah. And we also assume that it continues to be, to osir things on infinitum at that point. So
at least for basar b'chalav.
Exactly. So we have no clue for shari isurim yet. All right, how we doing on time? I want to look at one more thing. I'm going to jump us a little bit. Sorry, I should ask any comments, questions on that. I'm going a little bit quickly. Okay, let's go. I'm going to go just because in reverse order on my screen here a little bit, potentially. Let's go to Tzadi Chet Amud Aleph. It's a little more, maybe it's 2/3 of the way down the page. Amar Rav Shemen Bar Abba, Amar Rav Idi. It's going to be a long line of people. It's actually really kind of a short piece here. So maybe Jessica, you want to read?
I left my Gemara in my locker, so I think that is probably not the best
No
example.
problem.
I find it
I'll-
online currently.
We'll have you do
Another
something-
time.
Yeah, we'll have you read another piece. All right, Andres, you want to read?
Do
You're
you
on
hear
mute.
me?
I can.
Where is it exactly? I'm looking for the Amar le Rav Idi.
It's Amar Rav Shemen Bar Abba, Amar Rav Idi on Tzadi Chet Amud Aleph. So just go over to the next Amud from where we were.
Okay, sorry. I
Everybody
don't
else,
have it with
give me
me.
a thumbs up if you have it, please. So, everybody else has it. Look at that. We're going to skip you for the moment. Come back to you, Sarah Zager. Go for it.
Amar Rav Shemen Bar Abba Amar Rav Idi Bar Gershom Amar Levi Bar Patra Amar Rabbi Nachum Amar Rabbi Birin Mishum Zakein Echad Rabbi Yaakov Shmiya de Nisa Amru Beitza b'shishim Asura b'shishim ve'echad muteret.
Good.
So
Stop there.
okay, so long. Do you need me to go through the long line of names? Long line of
No.
names.
Yeah, long line of names. It was important just as a long line of names. Who said it in the name of Zaken Echad, right?
Yeah, in the name of right. It's also like there is a literary point here about like long line of names in the name of Zaken Echad.
Exactly.
I think there's a little comedy or something there. Okay, and they said that a Beitza is Asura with 60 and Muteret with 61. Meaning,
Exactly.
yeah. Is that
so?
Yeah.
So in other words, in order to be well, we're not, it's not 100% sure, but what does it sound like it takes in order to be batella an egg, according to this?
It seems like it's 61, and then we're gonna have a question about why.
Good.
You would.
6. So, but keep going with the sugya.
Amar Rabbi Zera le Reb Shemen bar Abba Ra'asha tamatil be gvul heter Shaharei shnei gedulei hador lo pirshu et hadavar Rabbi Akiva bar Idi Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani tarvaihu mishmei de Rabbi Yoshaya ben Levi Amrei beitza b'shishim asura beitza b'shishim ve'achat muteret. So basically, like you're stating some sort of like point at which beyond which they're permitted. But this other long line of people said
well, you haven't finished. You haven't finished it yet, right? So they have okay,
right. Said the same thing, but then they have a question about it. So when we say 61, do we mean 60 other things plus the bad egg? Or do we mean 61 excluding the bad egg?
Exactly, right? And they never answered it. You're going to give us an answer to it, right?
Yeah, like you're going to tell me that this question, right, below Pashi, this is the Mar Pashi Mifshat, right? So they didn't answer it, but you're going to do it?
Even though he didn't say anything different from what they said, right?
Exactly. And they seem to understand it, though, as if he is answering it, right? So it must be.
He didn't say anything different, but he said it in a way as though it was definitive. And yet they said the same thing and it wasn't definitive, and we really don't know what the definitive answer is.
Exactly. So.
Right, because at least we have this. I think the idea is like we have this question about whether the 61 includes the problematic egg or not.
Right. If 61 would include the problematic egg, then it would be just the same ordinary din of 60.
No, but don't we already have an answer from earlier in the Gemara?
60, or it could be 1 in 61, right? Which is really the question.
Yes, we did, right? Yeah. 62. Right.
So isn't the Gemara saying earlier the Beitza and Aminyan, like just making a plain statement that Beitza is never counted, so therefore it's 61 minus, like not including the bad egg, I guess, to a certain extent. It's like a different.
Exactly. it seemed to be the case in the other one. That's why either that's a different case of eggs, right? Or, right, there's a different ruling going on here. There's a different, or there's been an extra takana maybe even put onto it, at some point. So, which is why I think this is so confusing in some ways of like, well, what's going on? And, in terms of eggs. But we're not quite done. So I want to actually finish this and then we'll without actually answering it, because then we're going to look at actually how it gets solved in the halacha.
Right.
So.
Okay,
Keep
Itmar, Amar Rabbi Chalbo, Amar Rav Huna, Beitza b'shishim v'hi asura. So, Rabbi Chalbo says the name of Rav Huna that an egg can be batel, or it's usher if we have 60 and it.
Exactly.
So it's not batel. Beitza b'shishim v'hi asura, b'shishim ve'echat v'hi muteret. But if we have 61 plus the bad egg, making a total of 62, then it's mutar.
Exactly. Right. And Rashi says, right, b'shishim ve'echat v'hi dehavuluhu shishim ushtaim. Right. Like there we go. Right. It's total of 62 eggs, then it's batel. But if you don't have 62 total, including the rotten eggs, so to speak, it is not batel. Right. All right. All very confusing, I think, in some ways. And we see all these things, right? So just to remind us, we've seen this general idea of using an onion or a leek as kind of the standard. We've seen an idea that for Gid and Beitzah that they are, it's 1 in 60 where they are not part of the 60. We've seen Kechal where it is 1 in 60, but part of the 60. And then now we've seen an egg where it's 1 in it's 1 in 61, it's seemingly, according to the statement of Rabbi Chalbo. Let's see, Alana and then Ruben.
I was just going to say, in this discussion of the Beitzim, I don't remember where, but I remember we saw in some of the halachic sources about that this is because of variation in egg size, that's why there's this lack of clarity about, how many eggs we need. And it makes me think of what's happening here with the Gdolei Hador, the need for all these people to, this long line of attributions. Like it's almost like these guys are all the little eggs, and then you have the, but maybe the big eggs are the big people, and also the lehatil, like we're talking about, like lehatil beitzim, lehatil matil bagvul heter. Like maybe there's something happening there. Maybe I just thought it was interesting, and also and also with the kral and the may nafkamine, like. I don't know. It seemed like maybe there was something happening with like, well, what's the nafkamina and like what's coming out of this kral? I don't know. I thought maybe something they were playing with that a little, but I'm not sure. And the last thing I want to say is also as I look at the bottom of this Amud, I remember that we have the 2 memrod, I think both in the name of Bar Kapara, about Kol Yisurin Torah B'Shishim or B'Mea, like right before the Zerah B'Sheila Sugya. So it seems like, so the statement of Rabbi Yochanan is the same formulation, with the batzal v'kaflot kol isurin shebetorah misharin ki'ilu hein batzal v'kaflot. Like it seems like maybe there were just a lot of memrot from like the early Amoraic period, right, in Eretz Yisrael, all about well, how exactly are we gonna kol isurin shebetorah X, and these are some of those statements. And eventually it seems to get standardized, and we use the Zerah B'Sheila to get to like sort of come up with this shishim standardization. But this is sort of just in keeping with what people said before, that there are all these at this time, like sort of this was all being theorized at the time, and that's why all the memrot follow the same formula.
Great. I want to just, if I can add, which is beautiful, I just want to add to that, right, is there might have been certain things in this list that even though we seem to standardize eventually to 1 in 60, never quite stayed they veered a little bit from that standardization, either because they were from a tradition that didn't really want to accept fully at 60. Maybe it was like, well, I really want 1 in 61. I really want 1 in 59. Or it was because of some other reasons that are out there. And so these things that have strayed from our 1 in 60 that we all know about are going to be things that we're going to have to explain after the fact as to why didn't they kind of fall under this rubric that we've put everything else under at this point. So, but good. And Ruben, you had a statement too.
Yeah, just along the same line, like the Gemara does a pretty rough transition between batzal v'kfilot to shishim. So can we just assume that in the Gemara's mind, we could kind of like associate both of them together, meaning like batzal v'kfilot at this point in time becomes shishim, and shishim is basically the standard of batzal v'kfilot.
that's the way I started, and I think I might be biased in saying that. I can't guarantee that's the case. It seems to be at some point they were measuring it per, exactly like Rev Landis was pointing out. Somebody said this more very clearly, right? That they started with a standard of like a food taste standard, which itself is not so standardized, right? And when you get to 60, you get to a really strong standardization. And so whether or not they're exactly the same thing, I can't guarantee you. Some onions are stronger than other onions. Some leeks are stronger than other leeks. When you get to 60, then you're like really, you're kind of making it a very, across the board equal system. So
basically, in other words, the first part of the Gemara just gives you like a historical perspective, and like the second part of the Gemara goes into like more tachlis approach to it. It's like, okay, whatever, we already discussed about leek and onions, but at this point, like the standard measurement is 60.
I mean, look, if I ever get a time machine, I'd like to go back to this period and find out what, like how did they go from one thing to the next? But I can't.
That's not the first question I would have, but I definitely understand.
That's my first question. So it's yeah. So Rev Landis, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah. And then once you have the standard, but nonetheless, maybe there's a taste, then you have a decision, halachic decision. Does Tom reassert itself? Or do you say, you call that a taste? Because since it's not a taste. So that's, I think you'll see that. I think we'll see it again in the halacha.
We will.
But I think it's a real question. Does Tom reassert itself in its primacy, or has it been subverted?
So, yeah, and that's going to be it's also this danger of having a standard is you forget about what the real point of the standard was in the first place, which was you're not supposed to taste Easter, like that simple. But and so it can end up being a kula that you don't want in that sense. So good. And also, by the way, a chumrah, right? It can also be a chumrah you don't want, where it's like clear that it's like if I drop an Easter into something and it's clear that it's provided no taste, I've taken the Easter out or provided very little taste, but I'm still looking for 60. It could be that I'm throwing away food that I didn't need to throw away. So it can go both ways. So, but okay. With that, I want to jump to the Shulchan Aruch. It's a long jump in history. Sarichet, Yoredea, Siman Sarichet Seif Zayin. And Jessica, can I come back to you now?
Sure. Okay.
Perfect.
Betsy shish ba'efrav. טיפת דם שנתבשלה עם אחרות צריך 61 לבטל פליטתה.
Great. Okay, explain for us.
So an egg that's been fertilized, presumably, so it has like either a young bird in it or a drop of blood, and that was cooked with other things, you need 61 parts to battle its excretion. Great.
Of course, what about the egg itself?
The egg itself is a beer, yeah.
Yeah, you got to throw it out, right? You can't have the egg itself, right? Isn't batel. It's just the thing that is exuded from the egg. We're not going to do this today, but I just want to, if you go back and look at the Siman Shulchan Aruch about eggs itself, right? Actually, which I should have gotten, I need to go grab that. We're going to take a look at that piece in it anyway. Is that if it's an egg that has a shell on it, that doesn't make a difference if it's an efrach, but it does make a difference if it's an of tameh. If it's a beitzah from an of tameh, just to put that out there. And with that, I sent out a source. We'll come back to this in a second, but I sent out a Prisha from Yoredea Pevav. And if people excuse me, I have to go grab my tour from that section, but I sent it out also to you guys. If I can find it. And I'd like to read it. So we're in Pevav in Yoredea, in the tour, and in the Drisha, actually, in the Prisha rather, sorry. And it's Prisha Sif Katan Yud Bet. the Dibur Amatchil that I have is V'im Hi Klufa Oseret V'Serich Shishim V'Achat. This is talking actually about Beitzav and Of Tameh, that if it's the shell is removed, then it's Oser, but it's not actually what he's going to talk about here. So, but is that the right one? Yeah. Okay, great. Jessica, keep reading. Do you have it? That everyone has this source in front of them? No? I'll give people a second here.
Can you say it again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's your idea. It's in the tour. It's in the tour. We're looking at the Prisha on the tour. It's Siman Pevav, Seif Katan Yud Bet. Everyone give me a thumbs up when you have it, just so I can. So yeah, it's on Seif Hey in the tour, Hey Vav in the tour is the way mine lays it out. So Jessica, you got it?
I've got it in the blurry PDF, and I was seeing if I could also get it in.
Fair enough. Sorry, my picture taking skills are not so great. My excuse for everything is I had COVID when I did I still have COVID, but when I did all of this, so that's my excuse. So anybody have it clearly right now? Then we'll come back. Ruben, go for it. Ruben, read slowly so people can catch up in the Prisha.
והים היה כלופה אוסרת וצריך 61 וכולי. הטעם שצריך 61 לדעת הראש הוא, לפי שאין הביצים שוות זו לזו, ודילמה אינך קטנים מן האיסור, על כן צריך 61 שהיה בוודאי 60. Do you want me to translate or should I just
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so basically said that the reason that you need 61 Keneged Beitza is the Lidat HaRosh. Why? And he provides an explanation. Is like because not all the eggs are the same size, and maybe like the ketanim, the smaller ones are not the one that are sore, and therefore
I think his grammar is a little weird here. Enach ketanim, it is those ones that are the other ones that are mutar are smaller than the asura one, right? They're all small eggs. You may have meant to say that, but I just wanted to, right? And therefore we need, right?
61, so that way you're sure that you have 60 Keneged Isur.
Exactly.
It's basically a precaution.
Mm-hmm.
ואף על פי שגם קליפת ביצה אסורה מצטרפים להיתר, ואין צריך 60 אלא נגד האוכל שבתוכה, ובביצים של היתר מצטרפים הכל כמו שכתב רבנו ירוחם, וכמו שכתב רבנו גם כן לכמה סימן צדיק ט' בעצמו, בבשר איסור והיתר, אין שם מכל מקום חששו, שמה ביצה אסורה הייתה גדולה. כן כתב שתוך שלא יהיה גדול,
גדולה כל כך.
או כל כך שתוך שלא יהיה גדול משהביצים דהיתר, עם קליפתם וחכמים חשבו מידותיהם ולא חילקו.
So explain.
Where was I up to? And even though ואף על פי שגם קליפת ביצה אסורה מצטרפים להיתר, and even though that usually that the shell of the ביצה אסורה usually like adds up to the היתר, ואין צריך 60 אלא נגד האוכל, and usually you only need 60 against the store food שבתוכו.
In other words, right, you don't eat shells. We're going to see this in Tzadi Tet with bones, right? This whole thing is going to come up again, that the unedible parts of Isurim can help in the war against the Isur itself, right? And can help be batel. And so he's like, well, wait, even if it's a really big egg, it's got a really big shell, right? That shell helps out. So like, why do we need 61? That doesn't make sense. So what's the reason?
מסתרפים הכל כמו שכתב רבנו ירוחם. עד שמכל מקום חששו שמה ביצה אסורה הייתה גדולה כל כך שתוך שהוא גדול משאר ביצים דהיתר עם קליפתם. So it's basically an extra precaution just in case you have like such a big like egg of Isur that like all the other eggs together and the shell is not going to be big enough to be mevatel it.
And so good. And so what do the rabbis do?
Basically they agreed with it.
Well, I think they made
a measurement, yeah.
Yeah, they made a standard measurement for all cases that we can assume that in all, as long as you do 61, you will always, maybe not,